It's Tuesday, July 25th, 2017 at 6:30 in the evening, and this is a study session for the Littleton City Council. We have several items on the agenda tonight. We will have an ordinance review, and then we will have, for a future vote, we'll have to do a regular session. And then we have 3 study session topics, which may involve future votes, but they're pretty deep issues to talk about. So that agenda has been posted. I'm not aware of any changes to it. Okay, with that, I'd like to get started with Jocelyn Mills with item 1, which is ordinance review for the following regular meeting. It's 1A ID 17-220. This discusses a draft ordinance for minor clarifications to Title 10, Subdivision Code, Chapter 9, Administrative Plat and Replat. This is a topic that we have talked about previously in council, study session and regular sessions. So Jocelyn's got some final modifications she wants to present tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, council. Yes, we, as you know, earlier this year in May, we did update the subdivision regulations, Chapter 9. Used to be subdivision exemption, and it is now administrative plat and replat. And as a result of that passing of the ordinance, there's a couple minor updates that we want to propose to that Chapter 9. So that's what's in front of you this evening. The thing I am handing out is last night, actually, Planning Commission also reviewed this ordinance, and they had a couple changes. So I thought we would start with that. So generally, the discussion is around 2 portions of the Chapter 9 regarding criteria for making a decision. And the first one, 11.9.4b, is to more accurately reflect what we were intending here relative to being able to be processed administratively. So if you recall, we changed it. So the first level of can I use this code is the first one is, do I have 1 lot that I want to turn into 2, or do I have 2 lots that I want to turn into 1? If that is yes, then you move down to the criteria for decision making. And so these are the 2 sections we want to talk about tonight, or 2 of those provisions. The first one is about size. So if you remember, one of the things we really aim to work through, and again, this is for administrative plat and replat, so really minor stuff that can be administratively processed. We wanted to make sure that the block face didn't change in character. So anything that could come through administratively really needed to meet that average size. So the 11.9.4b is relative to the size. Currently, the code says lots that are 25% smaller, and we wanted to change that language with less to more. And actually, Planning Commission had quite a conversation about this last night. Just trying to make it simple, right? Sometimes it's always the smallest, simplest things that are the hardest to figure out. So in front of you, I did, the Planning Commission, they handed out B. It starts on line 12. And they changed that to be the recommendation of, I'll read it to you. Each parcel created by the administrative plat or replat is consistent with the existing character of the block face on which the property is located. And this is the part they rewrote. To be eligible for an administrative plat or replat, the revised lot must be within 75% to 150% of the average existing lots in either lot size, depth, or width on the same block face. So that's how they recommended that we revise that language to be clearer and to phrase it in the positive.
Actually, that's pretty good.
I thought it was too.
Yeah.
It took us almost an hour to figure it out, but yeah, it was great. It was a great exercise.
Making it positive as opposed to a negative statement.
It's a tricky little thing to get across, but
Yeah. So that's what we would like to bring forward to you guys as a revised language for that section. Then the second one, again, in that same criteria for decision, and this one centered around at the evening that council approved this Chapter 9 amendment. It came up about the word adequate water and sanitary sewer facilities. And the request was, could staff think that through and come up with a cleaner, more straightforward way to say that. So the proposal is in front of you. And the Planning Commission didn't make a change to this one, so this is what was in your packet. The applicant shall provide evidence that public water and sewer facilities are available to serve each lot. This shall be in the form of will serve letters from the appropriate service providers. So that's where we landed to propose that in front of you. An interesting side note, at one point I was asked, well, why do we even have this in the code to begin with? And I was like, oh, that's a really good question. So in researching that, there are certain state requirements as well as city requirements around subdivision. And both the state requirements, you just have to make sure that there is the availability of the services to serve subdivided lots. So that's really the research of why it's here. Now, staff's making a guess, but we think that most likely why it's specifically stated in this section is just as a reminder that on these small administrative plat and replat, we really just want to make sure that we check that box and that capability is there. And then what it means if it's not on either of these, so on B, if it doesn't meet that criteria, then not that it couldn't happen, it just needs to go through a minor subdivision process. So with that,
So what questions do we have for Jocelyn with the changes that she's presented to us?
This is silly. What does available mean? I mean, how close is available?
I'm not sure that service providers have a distance necessarily. It's just does Denver Water have the availability nearby to connect and serve the lot is the intention behind here. But I don't know if they necessarily mean, you have to be 2 feet from the property or what that means, but is it just in the vicinity that it can connect?
We know we've got water running down streets available that way, so I'm trying to figure in some instances, but probably not where this would happen, but in some places in the city, if a lot were subdivided, there could be some major cost in getting that pipe to the property.
Right. So this isn't really relative to the cost. This is more about, is it available to be connected?
So will the water folks provide it, kind of thing, with the costs attached?
So then the detail around like how and what size pipe is needed, all that comes through the city submitted as a civil CD, civil design, those plans, civil plans, they have to come in, and engineering, reviews all that detail to make sure that the pipes are adequate size and all that stuff.
Councilmember Cole, what this really ends up being is an engineering analysis. There may be a line in the street where a developer says, oh, I want to connect, but we look at it from an engineering standpoint and say, well, no, this line is substandard. It's really, this is necessary to be in the code, because it allows us to say to a developer, here's what is available. It may cost you some money because maybe it's not the line in the street, maybe it's a line a block away that you have to extend. But that is really an engineering analysis that your engineering staff will go through. It can involve all sorts of different things. They'll go through, they'll make that determination and say to the developer, this is how it's available. This is what you have to do.
Okay, thank you.
Additional comments, Mark?
Mr. Mayor, if I may, just from my perspective, I think where you're going to see this perhaps play out practically is on the sewer side. Because I think we do have a series of lots in the city that are still on a septic system. So I do like the language in here, a public water and sewer facility. So if the sewer facility being, public sewer facility being available, they would have to, in the case of septic systems, they'd have to have the public sewer system extended. So I think that's where that would play in from a practical standpoint, is my guess.
In that case, can I suggest that we insert the word public right before sewer?
In the first sentence.
Public
water and public sewer.
Yeah, just
To clarify that?
to remove any question on whether it's public water or possibly private sewer. Jocelyn and I actually spent a bit of time talking about this particular thing, and we went over situations on what not utilities being available might mean, like having to get easements across the properties and things like this. And I finally came to the conclusion that with all the other criteria in place, there really wasn't much purpose in here, and suggested that we just remove the whole section, and then went home and regretted that because, and I think that this is the right solution, because I was concerned that it's probably very rare, but there may come a time when Denver Water restricts building permits like they did before. And so you want some mechanism in there to be able to not go through the process. So I think this is the right solution. I think they did a good job.
Any other questions or comments in regards to this topic? So Jocelyn, what happens next is this change that you have given us at the planning session, or the planning commission had put in there, will be in what will be coming to us at a regular session the next time we see it.
We've got a few meetings out. It won't actually be your next regular meeting, but in this format, and as with the change we just added, that will be what you will see in front of you.
This is the official approved planning.
Correct,
from
yes.
the planning
Yeah,
commission.
yeah.
Sounds good. We may actually get this done.
And I've got to say that Section B actually is much improved over the 25%
Agreed.
there.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. It's great.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
This will bring us to study session topic 2A, which is ID 17-224. It's the Littleton Englewood Wastewater Treatment Plant Strategic Plan. And Keith Reister and John Koosman are together, have been working on this. I think John's going to be doing the presentation. John is a principal with the wastewater treatment plant, and we'll give him a moment to set up the technology.
It's not that I don't like John, but he's sitting right in front of the screen, so I decided to move there.
Glad you clarified that.
You know, well, he spends all day at the wastewater treatment plant. You never know. So, I guess I'll do the quick introduction for this. Keith Reister, Acting Public Works Director. John can introduce himself here in a second. As you all know, we are partnered in the wastewater treatment plant with Englewood. And when you think about wastewater, there's really two sides to it. There's the collection side, which we do sort of at the city level with our wastewater utility, basically taking it from once it leaves your home or building, getting it to John's facility, which is the treatment facility. And so tonight, John's going to share some of the insights they have from their strategic plan related to the wastewater treatment plant, the needs that we have out there, some of the regulatory changes that are ongoing in the wastewater marketplace. And from the staff perspective on our side, we're going to be coming back to you here relatively shortly and talk to you more about the collection side and what we know, what we don't know, what our structure looks like today, and also some of the work we're going to be doing over the next several months to really build a better portfolio of knowledge related to that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John so he can introduce himself.
Thank you. My name is John Koosman. I'm the director at the Littleton Englewood Wastewater Plant, and it's not my plant. It's a plant that we steward on behalf of the community. So I'm new in this role. I've been in this role about 4 months, and when I came on in this role, we report to a supervisory committee, and that committee asked me and our team to put together what was termed an environmental scan. Let's look out in the marketplace, look at the issues that would be facing the wastewater treatment plant that really will influence the long-term sustainability of this asset for our communities. And so there's going to be some new information in this presentation, and a lot of this information is outward-looking, is forward-looking, and so we're giving it to you tonight. We welcome feedback, but don't feel obligated to provide feedback, because on August 17th, we're going to have a joint council meeting We gave this presentation last night at the Englewood Council, and the hope is at that August 17th meeting, we can maybe dive into these issues a little bit more. But certainly if you have any feedback tonight, anything you want us to bring back or bolster between now and August 17th, we'll work on doing so. So I wanted to tell you the environmental scan is really going to focus on 4 major areas. Our facility is 40 years old, and so what comes with that is aging infrastructure and the need to continually revitalize those assets that have already been invested in. We have tightening regulations primarily tied to nutrients, protecting the uses that are really regulated downstream of us. We have a lot of opportunities with technological innovation and emerging understanding of the biology of wastewater, and that will allow us to potentially produce cost offset opportunities and in some cases actually revenue generation. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then finally, with the governor's state water plan and the huge population boom that this state is seeing, water's become a priority topic for this state. And priorities around water are really growing. And so I think that presents some interesting opportunities and to find out where the Littleton Englewood plant, particularly its location in this watershed, can play in some of those regional discussions. All right, so first and foremost, aging infrastructure. You'll see here, if I was in my college days, I would get an F on this graph because these bars are really, really tiny relative to the y-axis here. So this is a forecast of our cost over the next 20 years to continually keep our assets viable. And you'll see on average we're spending about $10 million. We're forecasting that we're going to need to spend about $10 million per year over this 20-year time frame. That's $200 million over this time frame. So it looks small on this graph, but that's not a small amount of money. A lot of that is the industry establishes asset life, and the maximum asset life is about 50 years, and that's tied to pipelines that are buried, that's tied to structures. So we're going to be approaching that in this time period, and we're going to have to look very, very critically at whether those assets can go beyond their established life. The other thing is our industry is relying very heavily on electrical controls and instrumentation. In a corrosive wastewater atmosphere, those technologies don't last more than 5 years. It's between 5 and 10 years. So there's a continuous reinvestment that's required. Some of our biggest vulnerabilities are included are the front of our plant and the head of the plant. And what we're going to be talking about today a little bit more as driving regulations is the middle of the plant. So if we don't have a viable front and back end, our attention on the middle of the plant is going to be, we're going to be distracted from that. So here's why the scaling is so off. It's the same scaling on the y-axis. The real costs that are going to influence the overall viability of this asset are tied to nutrients. And there's 2 regulations that are driving it. Regulation 85, which is an initial first step into lowering the total nitrogen and total phosphorus that we will be discharging. What that will do is it'll allow the state to meet an initial EPA request. It shows that the state's making progress in that regard. It'll also allow the state to use science to evaluate the impact of those reductions on the downstream water bodies. But what's looming out there and is currently forecasted to be in place by 2027 is this Regulation 31. And in simple terms, I don't want to oversimplify it, but this regulation currently forecasts us needing to build essentially a water treatment facility at the back end of our wastewater treatment facility. It's a new $500 million asset on top of an existing $500 million.
A water treatment facility for our water treatment facility?
Now, this would be tied to just to discharges into the river, so it's not a direct reuse of water, but it's very comparable in the standards that it's. I've heard it simplified. Water standards 30 years ago are the wastewater standards of that are forecast here. So
because we have our water plant already.
You do. Yep.
So this is just updating it.
This wouldn't really be As I said, I think I oversimplified that. It's a modular expansion of the wastewater treatment plant that gets us very close to drinking water standards. It doesn't actually go into a drinking water source, but the quality of water is very comparable or very close.
Thanks, Jim.
Sure.
So you can't do things within the existing plant that would get the water to this ridiculous amount, so you have to, it's ridiculous. So you literally, the water that is perfectly fine to go into the river at this point, and that we spend millions of dollars making sure that it is, we now have to run that through a water treatment facility that we would build specifically for your,
I'm sorry.
okay,
I didn't mean-
and then that's what goes in the river. Why are we putting it back in the river? Why don't we just bottle it and sell it?
It's a great question, and I'd like to.
This is so annoying.
This fits very perfectly with currently these costs anticipate a reverse osmosis process. That process originated in basically in converting seawater into drinking water. So this is a very high level treatment process. The industry is evolving, and it may not require that level of sophistication, and there may be some things that we can do to sort of supercharge our existing infrastructure, but I would not want to, and that's part of our staff's responsibility, is to evaluate those over the next 10 years. But I think there is going to be some additions, some modular upgrades to what we have, in addition to getting more out of what we already have.
John, isn't at least some of what I'm aware of is drinking water standards is actually not for a healthy river. And so in taking a look at getting the discharge to that level, have folks contemplated the impact on the aquarian and riparian life then? Because drinking water is almost anathema to some of that natural presence that's in the river.
Yeah, the standards that are in place are to balance. There's really 5 competing uses, or 5 regulated standards by which. There's 5 uses by which to drive the regulations. Aquatic life is one of them. So the studies the regulations do forecast the benefit to aquatic life, but part of what I'd like to talk about is that our position is to discuss the relative merits of these different levels of standards, use science to try to influence that, and make a scientific recommendation or determination in the final rulemaking here as to whether all of those uses are protected long term.
Well, given that what you're showing us is a single projection, isn't it really that there's a range of alternative futures?
Yeah.
And do we have some quantification across that, or do you have, and what can we do in the meantime to make sure that the right things happen?
You're asking fantastic questions, and to be honest, I'm not prepared to answer all of those. Part of this is I'm hoping that coming out of the August 17th is you charge us with coming forward and working to develop some of these alternatives. This is a quick 4-month environmental scan of what we're likely to be facing. I'd like for hopefully get direction to come back and advocate on a couple different solutions here going forward long term. So.
Remind us if we don't say it.
Okay.
I was laughing when you said reverse osmosis because my understanding is there's no approved disposal method for the brine that comes out.
Yeah, the technology is evolving, and they're starting to find some new disposal. But that's the huge, in being this far from a saltwater body, disposing of that high salinity discharge is a huge cost component of that. Not shown in the capital here. that would be an ongoing operation and maintenance cost, not directly tied to the capital.
Well, I'm hoping whoever it is that drives us to reverse osmosis, if that's what it is, also figures out how we can get rid of the brine at the end.
Going to raise everyone's blood pressure.
So this
It's already working for me.
Has to be added at the plant itself, right? And then that has to get to a certain level. Are they testing that there, or are we now still talking about also when it gets down the river where they measure the output that's already polluted by all the stuff that happens that we have nothing to do with?
As part of, we have a discharge permit with the state of Colorado, and the state sets those discharge limits based on their interpretation of EPA requirements. That discharge, we are regulated at our discharge level. So when it comes out of our pipe or out of our treatment process, that's where we're regulated. The broader question is, those limits that are established for our end of pipe discharge take into account what's in the river from other discharges, what's native with stormwater, what's native with the basic flow. But we are responsible only for our specific discharge, the water that we control.
Well, I know that, I hear that,
Okay.
but we've been told that it's not measured until it gets further downstream. What we're putting in is measured after which creek comes in, after it's coming in and runoff from the banks and other stuff come in. And they've contributed, even though what we're putting in is super.
Okay.
And I didn't say that clearly for anybody at home to understand, but maybe if you do, then you can answer.
I'm not sure the context of that past information you got is we are regulated, like I say, based on the process that we control our specific discharge. The overall contents of the river, that's evaluated in setting the base regulations, but what we're held responsible for is our actual discharge. And so
Okay,
I would.
do you remember anybody?
Yeah, I can support what you're saying in that. I don't remember how that discussion worked out. It may be what you just said, that the river is judged based on that, not necessarily our point of discharge, but there is something out there that's further toward Denver that is creating issues about how our plant is perceived. And it may have more to do with the Bar Lake and some other things there too.
Certainly. Part of what's driving regulations is there's downstream impoundments. There's the Milton Reservoir and there's Bar Reservoir. There's also drinking water intakes that come directly from the South Platte River. So those are two regulated uses of South Platte water, which influence the standards, the numeric limits that are proposed here in Regulation 85 and Regulation 31. So it's overall water quality of the river downstream, but that translates into a specific limit for our facility, which we're held responsible for. So I think let me take it. So one of the arguments is we are point sources. We're very easy to see, and it's a very defined point on the river. A lot of agricultural uses, which are more dispersed over a larger area, and where it's not as easy to measure their nutrient impacts to the river, those are also influencing some of these downstream sources. And so that's probably the context of the conversation that you heard before. But does that sound?
Well, it's not as bad as what I thought we've been told before. So again, we're measured downstream, even though it's not close to us, and people and their dogs and who knows what else have been in the river and is flowing from people's properties, the fertilizer from people's properties all flowing over into the river. We've cleaned it up, but that goes in and then we measure downstream.
So John, for the purpose of this discussion, though, you're just looking for direction on what to do with what leaves the property.
What I think Councilor Cole is bringing up the real root of what I'm looking for is I think this is a watershed. There's multiple sources of flow in this river. There's multiple uses of flow in this river. And when you're talking about cost implications of this magnitude, I think it requires a look for solutions across the entire watershed. And so what I'm going to be asking, what I'm hoping the Joint Council provides on August 17th is encouragement for our staff to go out and start in looking at some of these regional solutions, looking at the different roles that the different suppliers and end users of this water can work together to find the lowest cost solution, not only for our ratepayers, but over the collective ratepayers, the people who are paying water bills, the people who are paying sewer bills, the collective bill associated with this.
So I'll make it specific.
Sure.
Okay. From some of our discussions around the water plan, and the Colorado water plan development, I was on a committee with folks representative from Thornton. They're very interested in what we do because some of what we do now makes their job more difficult.
Sure.
And so anything that would be a collaborative discussion with Thornton so that whatever is being done at the wastewater treatment plant does not make their job more difficult, sounds like it could be a win-win-win as long as the river is healthy in between.
Right. You guys are ahead of me significantly. So I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'm gonna jump way ahead here. Okay. So first, so here's kind of for this box, which is the box that surrounds the Littleton Inglewood wastewater treatment plant service area. Historically, we've provided the convenience and the sanitation of a ready flush and a simple drain. That's the principal service that we've provided. And that service area is not just Littleton Inglewood. Here's Inglewood, here's Littleton, but about 75% of our community lies outside of those city limits. Further, if you look at the South Platte River, which is shown here, that watershed, these downstream users that you talk about, Thornton and Aurora, are water supply users. There's the Bar Lake and Milton Reservoir, which are also water storage. There's agricultural. This is one of, I think, 8 out of the 10 largest agricultural producers for our state are in this basin as well. There's industrial users through here, and then there's certainly, as you talked about, the aquatic life. Those uses are what are driving these regulations, and all of those uses are principally downstream of our facility. So they're a direct beneficiary of the service we're providing. And so, as I talked about, the governor has initiated this state water plan, and as part of that, they've divided up the state into 8 different watershed basins. And they've provided special treatment for what they're calling the South Platte Metro Basin, and that's the work group that you talked about. This is the urban center of our state, where about 80% of the water uses are centralized, where 80% of the water supply is located over here on the western slope. So this particular basin, it's been mapped within that state water plan as a focus area to try to find conservation and reuse solutions. And as I said, that fits in the bigger basin and it fits within the overall 8 basins. What I'm saying is there's a framework that's already in place. The counselor mentioned it. There's a framework in place that's driving the idea of collaboration, the idea of working together, us working with other wastewater entities, the Metro Wastewater Reclamation District, potentially working with Denver Water. If we're going close to drinking water standards here with our treatment process, could we partner with Denver Water as part of their reuse distribution system? They actually wheel that water to the South Metro area and going forward. Could Metro Wastewater divert some of their flow and capitalize on the capacity that you guys have invested in. And that would provide a base flow into the river, which provides aquatic benefit. It also provides downstream dilution. There are lots of potential opportunities out here, and what it really takes is an investment of time to try to develop the framework and the science behind those partnerships. And if I have a video here. It's a 5-minute video put out by the State Water Plan that I think characterizes the issues. Go ahead and show that. Okay.
Did you know that Colorado is one of the 10 fastest growing states in the U.S.? As the population grows, so do our water needs. Colorado's water has many competing uses, including agricultural, industrial, recreational, environmental and ecosystem health, and municipal. Looking forward, our growing population, the many types of demands on our water supplies, and our highly variable weather mean we may have to make choices about the way we use our water and recommit to manage it better and smarter than ever before. As we grow, our water needs will exceed existing supply, creating a gap. State-sponsored research shows that the demand for water will exceed the supply before the year 2050. What's more, the basin's population is expected to grow by 2.5 million people, meaning that municipal and industrial water demand could double what it is today. So what's happening? There are 8 major watersheds in the state. We call them basins. In 2005, the Colorado legislature passed a law that created basin roundtables, which are groups of representatives who collaborate and discuss each basin's water issues and encourage locally driven solutions to water supply challenges. Building off the work of the basin roundtables and with the new challenges facing Colorado, an executive order was issued in May 2013 calling for Colorado's water plan to address the gap and integrate a productive economy that supports vibrant and sustainable cities, viable and productive agriculture, and a robust skiing, recreation, and tourism industry. Efficient and effective water infrastructure promoting smart land use, and a strong environment that includes healthy watersheds, rivers and streams, and wildlife. Since that time, the Basin Roundtables have been developing basin implementation plans to guide the development of Colorado's water plan. A good Colorado plan needs a good South Platte plan. The basin is a key economic driver in the state. 7 of the top 10 agricultural producing counties in Colorado are in the South Platte Basin. Additionally, it is home to the Denver metropolitan area and other growing communities like Loveland, Greeley, and Fort Collins, which together account for over half of the state's economic activity. The basin's economy is also enhanced by environmental and recreational tourism, including skiing, boating, fishing, wildlife viewing, and hunting. The basin is also home to the state's most visited state parks and the eastern half of Rocky Mountain National Park. To meet existing water needs, South Platte Basin water managers rely on an extensive network of facilities and a vast system of privately owned water rights. Long-standing efforts to conserve and reuse water in order to get the most benefit from available supplies has meant that by the time water flows out of our state, each drop has been used multiple times for different purposes. As the South Platte Basin's population and economy grow, we are approaching a threshold where we'll have to make trade-offs in how our water is used, and our ingenuity and inventiveness will be needed more than ever before. If we don't plan carefully, the important environmental, recreational, and agricultural water uses that characterize the basin may begin to disappear. Most striking, up to 50% of today's irrigated cropland in the basin could be dry before 2050. We need a plan that not only maintains healthy economies and communities, but finds ways to enhance environmental and recreational resources in many places. In short, we need to keep doing what we're already doing, but do it better while working to make our rivers and streams healthy. Trying to juggle our many needs for water can be hard. That's why we are developing the South Platte Basin Implementation Plan. We are identifying solutions to meet our many needs. Are there more ways to conserve and reuse our water? Can multi-purpose water projects get built? Are there additional water supplies from outside the basin? When water is transferred to cities and industry, are there ways to minimize the effects on agricultural production and rural economies and maintain a farmer's property rights? Are there ways to maintain and enhance our environment and recreational resources while meeting all our competing water needs? Evaluation of new and expanded infrastructure and storage will be important for implementing all strategies. The draft plan considers a wide range of strategies that could be used in various combinations to meet the gap. Conservation and reuse, multi-purpose water projects that include municipal, industrial, recreational, and environmental components, agricultural transfers including alternative transfer methods, Colorado River basin supplies, and storage. Throughout, we must work to maintain and improve our environmental and recreational resources that make the South Platte Basin a great place to live. So we need your input. Read the plan and learn how we can meet our water needs. Then, help us by offering your input. How should we meet our growing water demands? What's most important to you? To learn more and provide input, check out southplattebasin.com. To take our survey, click here. And to see what other parts of the state are doing, please visit coloradowaterplan.com.
So just to kind of tie this up and what we'd like to talk about on August 17th, from our perspective at the wastewater, we are in real estate, location. I think there's an opportunity to embrace the types of regulations that are being forecasted here as a tool to drive discussions on the greater uses of water in our state and in the Front Range community here. So as these funding pressures are intensifying, knowing that we're not alone, knowing that this water, wastewater, agricultural gap is closing, we're in this environment of one watering, I think it presents an opportunity to broaden our definition of what our community is, who our stakeholders are. And to me, what I'd like for direction is, does the definition of fiscal responsibility, does it broaden to include trying to align cost with all the beneficiaries, all the stakeholders, leveraging strategic partnerships, and then really evaluating emerging technologies and applying those technologies to try to reduce the cost on all stakeholders. The other thing is this is a really unique opportunity for our facilities, for these communities to play a major role in what is a statewide issue. This can allow our facility and our service areas to be distinctive in this way. So I'm hoping that we can discuss this more on August 17th, and there's direction going forward for pathways that you'd like us to investigate as we represent you.
Now, John, one of the key points to the Colorado Water Plan was all of those things that you've mentioned, dealing with conservation, transfers, trying to deal with storage, transfers, and ag transfers. And we have enough water if all of those issues are dealt with.
Right, sure.
So far, the legislature has not done anything, so there's no teeth in any of this, so it's all voluntary at this point in time. Where is the Water Quality Control Commission in some of these, their position with regard to the legislature? And I'm not saying you have to have the answer tonight, but those are some of the questions that need to come up when we start talking about it on the 17th, is to say, here's what is happening elsewhere and around us and with us in dealing with some of these, because trying to strike a balance between, say, simply Littleton, Englewood, and Thornton may be in violation of other items that hinder the ability to actually collaborate across the basin.
Right. It's a very good point, and the depths, the devil's in the details on everything, and that's what we're hoping is to move these ideas forward, get the right gravity of stakeholders involved. I'll give you an example. So on Regulation 85, as part of the implementation plan, there's been enough gravity of stakeholders from the point source wastewater plants to influence that regulation, where the Water Quality Control Commission is actually going to consider a credits program. So if any of the facilities are actually discharging at lower levels than are required, they're actually going to they're considering awarding points to those utilities in order to defer the Reg 31 implementation. So time value of money, as we push the implementation of those costs out further, it saves the ratepayers money, and it also allows for technological innovation to potentially bring a solution to the table that wouldn't have been there otherwise. So that's the kind of, I'm not promising that, but I'm asking that we have enough room to go forward and start to evaluate these so that we can influence the commission and get enough gravity in there so that the laws can support this type of partnership agreement.
And there's this other aspect that some of us have been to Washington and discussed with the EPA is dealing with, none of us want dirty water.
Right.
But getting to the point of seeing some real cost benefit with regard to some of the regulations, and that they're not just pushing us because maybe technology can take us there, but technology at some point in time becomes very, very costly to get to very, very small returns. And we have folks living into their 90s now drinking water that may not be at some of those levels, but we also have complications with pharma packages that enter into our stream that are impacting some of the life and sustainability of life in some of our issues. And so it's it's kind of like phosphates and detergents. It's not just where we are with water treatment, but some of it is regulation of product that even enters into the stream.
Does anybody else have any discussion on this part of the presentation? Because John does have a second part that he wants to talk to us about.
Yeah, and in between that presentation, I'm going to actually, Chong Wu is going to come up and give the second part of the presentation. This is one of the, we talked about reducing cost and about potentially producing revenue. Here's a really good example that's a really opportunistic example that we'd like to share with. I'm going to pass around, this is an update, this is a tracking log that we developed. It's got the 13 issues that were brought forward in the last joint council meeting, and this is just a progress log on those. I'm happy to say we've made progress on all 13. We're going to report details on all of those items at the joint council meeting, but when Chong is done tonight, I'll be happy to address any specific questions you might have in advance of that. Thank you guys for your time.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you. So,
well, good evening. My name is Chong Wu. I'm the Engineering Maintenance Manager at the Wastewater Treatment Plant. So this evening, I'm going to present an update on the status of our biogas utilization project. First off, I want to say that as a staff, we're very excited about this project and excited about the opportunities that it brings not only to the facility, but also to the communities of both Inglewood and Littleton. So earlier this year, we initiated a project to assess the feasibility of using the gas that we generate as part of our digester process for beneficial reuse. We developed some specific project goals. The first being that we wanted to use the digester gas as an energy product. We wanted to promote renewable energy. We also wanted to promote net environmental benefits. We also wanted to create a revenue source for the cities as a means to potentially offset the burden to our ratepayers. We wanted to highlight the wastewater plant as a community resource. We wanted to show that the wastewater plant does have value as a resource recovery facility. And then lastly, we wanted to evaluate partnering with a third-party entity. We're not necessarily in the business of power generation or in the gas business, so we wanted to leverage their expertise to help us moving forward with this project. So to speak to our current potential, on average, we generate about 470,000 cubic feet per day of digester gas. So that equates to approximately 2,000 gallons of gasoline generated per day. So if we were to project that out over 20 years, assuming a nominal 1% annual increase, we're estimated about 2,500 gallons of gasoline generated per day. So we do believe that we have a valuable energy product on our hands here.
John, can I
Yes.
interrupt with a question?
Sure.
I thought that we were paying part of the cost of a consultant to come in and do a study on biogas and what the alternatives were. Is this a summation of that study?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and you'll get us a copy of the actual study?
Yes, we can provide a report to you, yes.
Okay, thank you. Before the 17th.
Yeah, we have a draft report in our hands, and we are providing comments on it right now, but we will definitely try to get that before the 17th.
Okay.
Just know that as engineering consultants are, the numbers that are shown here, they look to continually refine and know those numbers, so there might be a slight difference in some of those numbers. So just be aware of that.
We promise to not believe them.
So as part of the evaluation, we looked at several alternatives to using our biogas. The first was using the gas as part of the on-site engine generation. The second was converting the digester gas to compressed natural gas and using it for vehicle fuel. And the third was converting the digester gas to pipeline quality natural gas and then injecting that back into a utility service line. So as part of our analysis, pretty early on in the analysis, we actually eliminated cogeneration as a viable alternative for two reasons. First was that the high costs associated with owning and maintaining the engine generators was really high. And then secondly, in terms of the revenue, it couldn't compete with the federal programs that both the CNG and the pipeline natural gas has available to us. So that was kind of dropped early on in the process, and then we focused most of our attention on the CNG and the pipeline natural gas project. So both has its pros and cons. In terms of compressed natural gas, it did prove to be a viable alternative for us. In this process, we actually have to condition and clean the gas to remove the siloxanes, to remove the hydrogen sulfide, the moisture, and the carbon dioxide. And then that gets injected into a pipeline used for vehicle fuel. The issue with that is you have to find a customer or find a demand for that pipeline. And while we have some alternatives out there in our service area, and we actually researched Waste Management, just located off of Santa Fe and Union, as a viable partner for this project, we had a couple of issues that arose. First, we would have to install and construct a pipeline from our facility to the waste management facility. So there would be some challenges of going through all those properties and public and private properties. Also, waste management wouldn't have the capacity to use all of the gas that we would produce. So we would have to either build a large storage facility or vent the excess gas to the atmosphere, or I'm sorry, not vent, but burn the excess gas to the atmosphere. So we wouldn't be able to take advantage of all the gas that we would produce. There was something else I wanted to say about that. We also, as part of that, we actually reviewed building a fuel station within our plant facility, but that also has some risks because we don't actually have a demand source for that. We don't actually have customers to actually come to our facility and use that CNG gas. So we looked at pipeline natural gas. It actually proved to be a very viable project for us. For this, it's very similar to the CNG where the same cleaning process. It would be an additional cleaning process to remove most of the carbon dioxide. So for this, we'd actually use the majority of the gas, which is great because the pipeline always has a consistent demand. So we would consistently inject our digester gas into a natural gas pipeline. This project would actually have a quicker payback period because it has a smaller, just a less initial capital cost for us. And because we're using the majority or almost 100% of the gas, it actually has a higher revenue for us going forward in terms of the federal revenue incentive programs, which I will get to in a later slide. So our recommendation is to do a project to convert our digester gas to pipeline natural gas and then inject it into a utility service line. We actually have an opportunity here to partner with Xcel Energy. They have a natural gas line located adjacent to our north property boundary. So that would actually make the construction much more simple, less risk. And because Xcel Energy is obviously, they're not going to go anywhere. So it's a low risk because we'd actually partner with them. We wouldn't have to identify any other customers or any other third-party vendors to use our gas. It has, again, a lower capital cost and therefore a lower payback period. So the pipeline process is a relatively new process. There's a few installations, or a couple installations in the United States, and there are a few more on the way, with 2 being commissioned later this year and 1 later early in 2018. However, the process to clean and condition the gas is actually a well-established process. It's the same process that landfills are currently using right now. So in terms of the risk, we believe that this is a relatively low risk with high potential gains with revenues that are coming up. So I spoke earlier about the revenue opportunities. The revenue opportunity is through the federal or the Renewable Fuel Standard Program, and this was enacted by the Energy Act of 2005. It's actually administered by the Environmental Protection Agency. So this program actually is a national policy created to reduce our reliance on non-renewable fuels. So it's actually designed to reduce fossil fuels and actually designed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So what this requires, it requires oil producers to purchase renewable credits, a certain amount of renewable credits every year. So for every BTU of digester gas that's used for vehicle fuels, that equates to a renewable credit, or it's called renewable identification numbers, or RINs. And so these RINs are actually traded on the open market, and their value actually goes along with the oil prices. So as oil prices increase, so does the RIN values. And so these oil producers, such as Exxon and BP, actually purchase these RINs so that they can show compliance with that fuel program standard. There are actually 4 classes of renewable fuels. And then for wastewater treatment plants, it's this cellulosic biofuel right here. And this is actually really great for us because the cellulosic biofuel actually has the highest RIN value in terms of all the renewable fuels. So you notice this first category here is called renewable biofuel. That's actually the ethanol production. It actually has one of the lower RIN values. So having that cellulosic biofuel classification for wastewater plants is actually very valuable for us. And so that's one of the reasons why we're highly motivated to do this project. So the EPA has mandated certain quantities of these biofuel or renewable fuels every year. And then that cellulosic category is this D3 category, which is shown by this darker shaded blue. And so you will note that it started in 2013 and it goes on through the year 2022. And so those volumes dramatically increased through that year 2022. Beyond 2022, the EPA has not yet established those mandates. It is our expectation that they will establish new mandates beyond that year as the need for renewable, the want for renewable fuel and renewable energy in this country is pretty strong. So in this chart, we're showing the average price for the RINs over the last 3 years. So in 2015, it was just over $1 per RIN. In 2013, it rose up to about $2, and currently right now in 2017, it's trading at about $2.50 per RIN. So if I go back, so based on the large quantities of these advanced cellulosic biofuels, it is our expectation that that'll continue to drive the market, and therefore the RIN values will continue to increase as the years continue. So the current price is $2.50, and then we took a 3-year average as $1.78 as part of the calculations that you'll see later on in the next slides. So this is a quick summary of the total project costs. You'll notice at the end there we have an initial capital investment of about $7.8 million. And if you look at the total annual revenues of just under $2 million, the RINs are what's driving the revenue. Let's be honest, and we understand that, and that's why we're highly motivated to pursue this project, as the RINs are really favorable right now and guaranteed through the year 2022. And this calculation was based on the current RIN value of $2.50 per RIN. So we conducted a 2-part sensitivity analysis on our project, and the first being based on the RIN variability. So here I'm showing if you want to look at the blue line first, you'll note that that's based on the $2.50 per RIN, and we show a payback period of our initial investment at just within that 4-year period, which is really attractive for us. And then that $1.78 is that 3-year average for the last 3 years of RINs, and that's shown by the orange, or this bottom line right here. That shows a payback period within 6 years, which is still highly attractive. So this green line, which shows the line trending downward, what that is showing is a worst case scenario for us. So we take the $1.78 per RIN, which is the average of the 3 years, and you'll see that at year 2022, we don't quite reach our payback period. We get to about 60, maybe 70% of our payback. And then as a worst case scenario, if the program is not renewed, then the RIN values obviously are worth zero. There's no value in those RINs. So that we would, based on the operations costs, we would continue to go negative. So at that point, we would utilize our exit strategy, which I will get to at a later slide. So in this analysis, we looked at financing options. So here we looked at several different options for financing, whether the cities wanted to self-fund this project or go to the bond market or perhaps do a third-party financing with another entity. So the takeaway on this chart that we're showing here is the financing over the long period, the 20-year period, the financing does not have a huge impact in terms of the overall revenue for this project. So if the cities wanted to save on their capital reserves and for other projects or other needs, financing actually, again, would not impact the overall revenues for this project. So the timing of this project and the marketing of the RINs is very critical for us. This project supports our triple bottom line. We believe it has a low risk. We believe that Xcel Energy is not going anywhere, and there's always going to be demand for natural gas. While the RIN program beyond year 2022 is uncertain, we do believe that there is support for this program to continue, as you know, we have support for energy independence and having less reliance on foreign oils. And also, as I spoke to you about the ethanol, the ag industry heavily relies on these RINs for that ethanol program, and ethanol is a huge industry in our country. So, as a worst case scenario, if it were not to be renewed, we identified two viable exit strategies for an off-ramp for this project. We could go to cogeneration, utilize that electricity that we generate on site to offset some of the electrical burdens for our facility. The second option would be to convert, to go to compressed natural gas and build a facility or find other resources to sell that CNG for their fueling usage. Now, both would require an additional capital, and we're again, these are just estimates of around $2 to $3 million. This would be anywhere from investing in a storage facility, investing in the fuel station, investing in engine generators needed for that. While we haven't done the calculations to actually see our rate of return on these investments, we do believe that there would be viable revenues involved in order to recoup our investment of that additional capital. So in terms of the schedule, we're anticipating doing another presentation at the joint study session in August. And then our goal is to gain support of this project, and then we would bring a design contract with our design engineers for approval to the Inglewood City Council in September. We have quite a few things to accomplish in a short period of time, and our goal is to begin construction in early next year, complete it by the end of next year, and then by early 2019, we'll start to receive the first of the revenues for those RIN credits. Current status, we have initiated the negotiation or discussions with Xcel Energy on that interconnection agreement, and they've shown a high interest in partnering with us for this project. We've done a request for proposal for a broker services. This is a professional services. So, and actually, to be a RIN facility, you actually have to be certified by the EPA. So this broker would help us to be certified with the EPA, manage all the administrative requirements and all that's needed for that purpose. They would also serve to help us act as our to help us to monetize and market the RINs and sell them to the oil producers. We are currently actively discussing financing options with both cities, and we hope to get some direction on that soon. And then we're finalizing the design service with our engineers, which is Carollo Engineers. And so finally, this project does support our facility goals of trying to achieve energy independence and having a resource recovery facility, but it also is in alignment with both the City of Inglewood and City of Littleton goals. I've highlighted a few of the goals here, specifically of assuring fiscal responsibility, of providing a sustainable environment, and maintaining a reliable public infrastructure. And Mr. Mayor, take any questions.
Just if I may just quickly add on to what Sean was saying and kind of follow on to what Keith mentioned as well. Specifically in 2 weeks, we're going to come back, or August 8th, I think is the date. We're coming back to council with this concept shown in the financial plan of the sewer utility. So we've also injected into that financial plan the forecast for capital at the plant to meet the regulations that John Kuzman was also talking about. So that's your first opportunity kind of prior to the real budget discussion so you can get a feel for the financial impact of this as we look at the sewer utility. Then you'll have all that information as you go into the joint meeting on August 17th.
John, so when you said 2,000, equivalent of 2,000 gallons of gas, whatever we're putting out. So do the brokers get excited about these kind of numbers, or are these too small numbers for them to be thinking?
Oh, no, they're very excited, and they're very motivated.
As a buyer or a seller?
As a seller. They would work on our behalf to sell these RINs to the oil companies like BP or ExxonMobil or any of those large companies.
So there's a volume enough where it does interest them?
Yes.
The risk of this bothers me. The goal of not flaring off natural gas is obviously good for the environment. If we can get some added revenue, that's great, but we've got some pretty high risks here. I think some of us at CML talked to a vendor that what he said was they had basically a private sector come in and clean the gas up, and then they would assume the risks. When I actually read his proposal, though, I either didn't understand the proposal or was a bunch of hand-waving. It didn't actually come up with what he was describing. However, I'm guessing they're not the only ones that are out there. I'd like to see some alternatives to us hiring a design engineer to go off and build this ourselves and us assuming the risks. I'm not opposed to the project. I think the project is probably a worthy project. I'm just adverse of risking ratepayers' money that they're paying for sewage treatment on a biogas potential revenue generation in the future. We'd look terrible if we had to do an exit strategy, and frankly, with this administration, I don't think nationally, I don't think anybody can predict what's going to happen. I don't think anybody's predicted.
What are along the lines of risk, you have here the loans 3, 7, and 10 year, though I assume those are the amortizations.
Yeah, those are just we didn't actually look at getting actual quotes from loan vendors. We were just estimating, just giving a range so that you could see overall over the long period what the impact would be for those loan periods and those interest rates.
But if it's a $7.8 million project, we would presumably tailor the amortization period to the expiration of the program.
You could do that, yes.
So, yeah.
Additional thoughts?
Well, I was going to say, I think we ought to get to a point where we understand better the risks as well. And what you might want to do, or I'd like to see, or have you consider doing, is outline the different elements of risk that are there. One is the end market, of course, where we might be with regard to financing, and in understanding where the exit strategy is. I know how you said that there would be revenue to offset some of that exit strategy. but point that out to be able to say, hey, what it does is it just changes the break-even period, or it doesn't. Trying to understand it. I think, though, there's going to be a continued market for CNG, but you may want to put some more words around that to understand that that's there. And you point out how the RINs were somewhat dependent upon that, but if that you've shown a situation where it goes entirely, but if the RINs goes, there's still going to be a market for the CNG.
Right.
And what that scenario looks like maybe needs a little bit more explanation so that there's a opportunity either to be more uncomfortable with the risks or to become less uncomfortable with the risks.
Other thoughts or comments? I really like the idea, and I think all of us can see the pro side of it. The con side, I think, absolutely, because of the nature of who we are and what we do. And I like the idea that Phil presented of model out a few ways in which it would work its way through to some point in the future. It would help us understand what those risks might be. For sure, for that meeting, I would imagine the Englewood City Council would be concerned also, because we're dealing with constrained resources on many levels. So.
Well, and yeah, just to mention what you were saying, I mean, currently we're flaring it off, so we're contributing to a unhealthier environment in what we're going down a path, and so this moves us in a direction of a more sustainable environment. And so I definitely don't want to lose sight of that. And so heading down some of these paths to capture this with an alternative use is something that has merit.
Any other comments? Thank you.
Yeah. I'm not sure I know what I'm thinking with this comment, but it's not related to you. All the questions for you are really good. I'm kind of interested in what this also does with Excel prices. Sometimes Excel does things that reduce their costs, but they treat it as like something golden, and then charge people more for providing something that they got cheaper. So just as a tangential thing, not related to this discussion, I'd like us to have some consideration of that.
So in other words, you're saying getting in bed with Excel has its own issues.
It gets to be a pretty complex chart.
Yeah, no kidding.
But absolutely, we're hooking our star to Excel, and that's not exactly something that's
Bruce?
Yes.
Also, I think a little bit more on, are RINs kind of considered a commodity? I mean, it seems like they're treated like that. Get a little bit more of a overview of that over a period of time. So to see where, the stability of that, and then the demand for that based on how, cars are, everything's becoming more fuel efficient,
Right.
et cetera, and how does that start to play in? Because this is something, I think, long-term, well, and I think your numbers show, even short-term, it's a good return, and I think long-term, it could be a really high-level source of income for the plant, which is obviously a huge benefit to our ratepayers, because then they pay less, which is where we do want to get. So what that can start to look like based on best guess.
I think that wraps it up. Any final comments?
No, see you again in a couple weeks.
We will be talking.
Very good.
Can't stay away from it.
Thanks, guys.
Flush your toilets a lot before
Take a break.
business.
Yeah, let's take a 10-minute break and we'll come back.
I like that. Shred of a bridge.
7:45.
Thanks, man.
Mics are still on, I remind you, and I'll give it a thumbs up and we'll be on the air. We're on the agenda, item 2, study session topics. Item B, ID 17-199, table discussion to refer ballot question for November 7th, 2017 election. And our Finance Director, Tiffany Hooten, has a presentation for us.
Good evening, Council. We've discussed previously that the City of Littleton has a Tabor excess for 2016, and we are here to discuss the potential possibility of putting it on a ballot. So I have a quick slide presentation for you that I'd like to go through and answer any questions you might have throughout. There are several documents included in your packet, and hopefully you had time to kind of peruse some of those. I'm sure Tabor is a highly interesting topic, if you will, so hopefully you were able to read some of it. And following sewer, I'm sure this is a great evening for you tonight. Sewer and Tabor, hand in hand, there you go. So I'd just like to start with a summary. Littleton exceeded the Tabor cap in 2016 by $1,937,904. Council, you have two options to deal with this excess. One is you can refund the excess revenue. The other is to ask voters to keep the money and spend on local projects or services. A little bit background on Tabor. Tabor restricts revenues on state and local governments. It's been around since 1992. There are many, many municipalities in Colorado that have been de-Bruced, if you will, and I'll use that term quite a bit. Littleton is definitely one of few municipalities that are still subject to Tabor limits. And there's many contributing factors to a Tabor excess. Specifically in 2016, some of the things that contributed to it were higher impact fees in 2016. We had a large increase in building use taxes, more than we anticipated in our budget. And then just generally an overall increase of revenues in total when you look at all the funds that are subject to Tabor. Some more background, Littleton does have a successful voter approval on retaining excesses for specific projects. Several years are listed here, starting in 1994. And the one thing that I will highlight is that we did ask for full debrucing in 2006, and it did lack voter approval in that year. And then evidently in 2006, we had an excess of about $1.1 million, which was refunded to citizens. So I mentioned two alternatives for council. One is to refund the excess money in many different possible ways. The other is to ask voters to keep the money to spend on local projects or services.
And that's for the city to keep it, not the voters to keep it.
Right, the city to maintain the excess, yes.
In case anybody's out there watching.
Right. So when we talk about asking voters to retain, we all know that the city has significant capital and infrastructure needs over the next 15 to 20 years. We've talked about this several times, and we're going to continue to talk to council with our 5-year fiscally constrained plan for the capital projects and our 15 and 20-year plans. What we're suggesting is that we dedicate the Tabor excess for specific projects, and we talked briefly about those in the last meeting, and I have Brent and Keith here who will speak to those projects again. And in addition, since we already have a municipal election next year, there's minimal additional cost to add this to the ballot. Some of the ballot options. I included two options in your packets for this evening. One is to retain the excess and adjust the base. This would provide the less likelihood of the city having an excess in future years. The other is to retain the excess and not adjust the base, which would enhance the likelihood of the city to have a Tabor excess in the future. One additional option that's not included in your packet but was mentioned at the last meeting is potentially to add additional years for the city to maintain the excess. Currently, the Tabor ballot language is addressed for 1 year, but there's a possibility of adding 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 years, whatever council may decide on that. I wanted to talk a little bit about the base, and I'm trying to be as general as I can to help everyone understand what we mean by adjust the base or not adjust the base. So I kind of did this little graph here. Hopefully it illustrates and you're able to understand. So I wanted to touch on this a little bit. So for 2016, our base was about $67 million, and I've rounded just for simplicity. And our revenues, our total revenues subject to Tabor came in at $69 million, hence the $2 million or $1.9 million that we've been talking about in the excess. If the city does not adjust the base, what that will do for 2017 is we will take the 67 that was our base in 2016. We will add for our growth factor, which includes inflation and growth from the counties. Last year, it was, I believe it was 2 point, what was it last year? 2.96, or 1.81. So that includes a growth factor and then a CPI factor. So if we don't adjust the base in 2017, we will take the 67, we will apply I'm estimating a 3% growth factor, and our base will become $69 million. Now, based on our 2017 budget, we are estimating our Tabor revenues to be 68.7. And I just want to caution you, this does show what I'm calling a cushion of about $300,000. But what I will say to that is $300,000 is not a lot of cushion, if you will, on about $100 million total budget. So I just want to keep that in perspective. $300,000 is a little close. So when it was asked the last meeting what we anticipate for 2017, since the city does budget conservatively for revenues, I don't know that we would come in at the 300,000. I really think that we would probably be above our 2017 budget, hence the possibility of having a Tabor excess in 2017. Now, if we're able to adjust the base, what that essentially would do is we would be able to take our revenues of $69 million in 2016, apply a 3% factor, again, it's just estimated, so that our initial base for 2017 would be 71.1. If you look at it, it's adding about $2 million to our base in 2017 and going forward. So I just kind of wanted to explain the what affects the base and not adjusting the base. Do you have any specific questions? Does that help? I hope.
I have some specific questions.
Okay.
It looks like there's two different ways potentially of calculating the base. The way I read Tabor is you take the revenue that was collected in 1991 or 92, and then you sum together for local governments the inflation and the local growth, multiply that times that actual revenue in, let's say, 92, and that becomes the new base for 93. In 94, you take the 93 calculated base, and which you do every year. So the base is only hooked to the actuals at the very beginning of 1992. That's method one. The second method is where you take the actuals of the previous year, whatever those actuals are, that becomes your base times, or that is the value times the growth and the inflation, and that becomes the base for the next year. And so if your actuals go down, potentially your base would go down. And hence the people talking about the ratcheting effect. It seems to me, though, that what Tabor describes is the first alternative, which is you take the actuals that were collected in 1992, and then you multiply that each year by the growth and the inflation, and that becomes the base. Otherwise, the language about having base adjustments makes no sense because it only applies to the very next year, and then it all goes away. So which method do we use, and which method are we thinking is legal under Tabor?
So the method that we are using is the base from the previous year plus the inflation, and that's related to the Tabor question from 2006, I believe.
Inflation plus growth.
Plus growth, yes.
But the base from the previous year, based on what? On actuals or on the original index that started in 92, or the original amount started in 92 and indexed forward?
It's on the base from 2006 because it was adjusted.
You didn't ask that number.
Okay, explain that then, please.
So in the Tabor question in 2006, I believe it's 6, forgive me if I've got the dates wrong. So the Tabor question allowed us to adjust our base to the 26 amount and adjust it annually thereafter by the inflation and growth.
So it's method one, but it's hooked to the 26
base
dollar figure.
Yes, okay, that's correct.
So the base really isn't dependent on the actuals.
No.
It's really dependent on the figure of 2006.
Right. Yes. And so what this would do is it would base future bases on the 2016 number. Otherwise, we would continue with the methodology previously.
Okay.
And I use 3% as the growth factor, the average growth and inflation. The average growth in the previous 4 years was about 0.56%, and then you add CPI on top of that. So it could vary depending on where CPI or the growth comes in.
Do we have additional questions?
Yeah, I want to go back to what you had as the third option, Tiffany.
Yes.
You said add additional years in conjunction with one of the above options.
Right.
So if we took option one being the 2016, option two, 2016, and not adjusting the base, what might that look like?
So with additional years, So what that would do is if we do not adjust the base and we end up having an excess in 26, 17, 18, or let's use 3 years as an example, 17, 18, or 19, if you add 3 years to the ballot question, then if there is an excess in those 3 years, then the city would be able to retain that excess. And then in the third or fourth year, we would reevaluate and potentially see where we are and if we have to come back.
Tiffany, what is the cost? We have municipal elections every other year. If we go to the ballot with Tabor in an off year, what's the cost then?
For some reason, I'm thinking about 20,000.
About 26 to 30,000
okay.
is what it would be if you went back in 18.
Well, we're 3 counties, so it,
I think that includes the 3 counties, yes.
Counties.
Yeah, I was thinking 20-something thousand, yes.
So, follow-up question to that idea of hooking an additional years to the option number 2. What makes our initial ballot strong is we list specific projects. How would we have an equal strength for future years when it's tentative? What wording, do you have some thoughts for a wording that might encompass that?
Well, one thing that you could do is you could potentially change the projects that are listed. So rather than having 5 or 4 specific projects, maybe you dedicate it to street maintenance and rehab for the next 3 years. That would be one option that you could do. That way it's still for specific capital projects, street paving, things like, I don't know all the terminology for streets, curb and gutter, things like that. So that's one option that you could do so that you're still maintaining it to go to capital projects or infrastructure needs. I don't know, Mark, if you have any additional suggestions.
Well, I think that's for multiple years. That's probably the easiest way to categorize that. And I know we've had some conversation with council about maybe looking at maintenance as a project. I think if council has interest in doing something beyond that, traffic signals is just an example. We certainly have intersections that I know that engineering has been looking at, so we could likely come up with some other intersection improvements if that's important to council. But I think just generally those are probably the 2 categories that I'd probably recommend consideration, at least at this point.
And without knowing what the potential excess might be in 2017, 18, or 19, you can't very well know the dollar amount to be able to pinpoint specific projects like that.
And Mark, I'm thinking as far as the budgeting purposes and asking the citizens to retain the funds. Let's say it is $1.5 million for the next several years. How can we word it so that it doesn't mean we're going to the budget's going to be less because it's fungible, it's going to go somewhere else. So all we're doing is just going to take this money, we're going to say we're going to use it for pavement, and we are. But we're also budgeting pavement less with anticipation of getting that money.
Excellent question. I think we've had some discussion internally as staff about that exact same issue here. So historically, we've been paying, prior to this year and last year, about a little over $1 million in street maintenance. There's other categories that kind of fit into that, certainly internal to the operations of Public Works, but generally we've contracted for just roughly about $1 million. So I would suggest to council that as part of a Tabor discussion that we obviously budget at least that for the regular routine maintenance, and any excess Tabor would be on top of that. And as we've talked with the Public Works staff, our list of street maintenance projects is pretty substantial. So we are beyond confident that we can come up with a list of projects here for street maintenance, quite honestly, for many years to come. So this would be an opportunity to kind of...
Well, I'm sure we can find a way to spend it. I just want to make sure we word it so that it's not saying, it's just a word game. That, we're going to spend it on pavement, but at the same time, we're backdooring that money somewhere else.
Appreciate the point. Yeah, we're concerned about that too. Certainly that would not be our intent here.
Well, I like the idea of if we're spending $1 million for the last so many years, we anticipate that budget-wise to keep going up by 2% or whatever.
Yeah, and if you remember too, though, I think what complicates this is if you remember last fall, is the 5-year capital plan, for which we do have a fair amount in reserve in that 5-year plan, but we also were showing you that the transfers from the general fund to keep that healthy is going to evaporate. And so we're spending down the fund balance. So the things that we've done, this year, like $2.5 million for street maintenance, we will not be able to project that kind of expenditure here in the capital fund in future years. We just can't afford it.
Anybody have any other thoughts? I know what we need to do tonight is we need to leave the meeting with guidance to staff to what ballot measure we would like to see on the ordinance that we would look at the next regular meeting.
What's our deadline for that? Because that's got to be coming up to get that on the ballot.
We are well in advance of the deadlines here. We have a little bit of cushion on that, but we do need, as the mayor said, we do need specific direction on what you want to do for, if you're going to proceed with the ballot measure, to ask approval to keep it, the projects you're intending to focus on. I
think we also need to decide, probably tonight, what the refund mechanism would be, so that we can explain to people, if you vote for the Tabor excess and we keep the money, this is what we spend it on. If you don't vote for it, this is how it will be refunded, and this is the amount that you can expect.
Is it necessary that that be in the ballot?
I don't know this.
No, the refund mechanism won't be on the ballot.
Right.
That's just an internal thing that if the city had to refund the excess, the council has to determine that means, but that won't be any part of the ballot at all. It's just a separate policy decision that you will have to reach.
But I think we need to explain that in the Littleton report and the other.
Absolutely.
I don't think we can make it as a resolution of intent or something, if not, this is where we are, just so it's more formal than just.
Well, we could include it as the ordinance when we put this on the ballot, or would that violate the double?
We would not include the refund mechanism in the ordinance. Council could certainly adopt a resolution expressing its intent that if the adjustment did not pass, then the refund mechanism that would be used would be whatever mechanism council so chose. But the refund mechanism won't be any part of the ballot question.
And I am prepared to talk about some refund options tonight.
I'm prepared to just select one.
Great.
Property tax refund.
So, in order to proceed, then, are we comfortable at this point with enough information that each of you would be willing to say whether of the ballot languages that are proposed, option one or two, one has the base readjustment in it, the other just discusses the excess, which of those two you'd like to see? And then maybe we could go further then and talk about if there's any interest in a multi-year, because that would require some consideration. Or I'm trying to find the method by which we get to the conclusion. And then also we talk about a refund mechanism.
My preference is to have the retention as one ballot issue and to have the base adjustment as a second ballot issue. Put them both on there. At this point in time, I think retention for 1 year and adjust the base to, or the ballot question would adjust the base to the 2016 number. And then we need to explain to the voters how that works and what that means.
One may pass and the other may not, but if they're combined, they can both go down.
They could both go down. You could, strangely enough, have a base pass and not the retention.
It's all going to be dependent on our ability to be able to communicate this well.
I'm in agreement that I do not want to have both those issues on the same ballot measure. I think if I read properly how people have felt in 2006, it was pretty obvious that they were not interested in that, and it really hurt, I think, whatever those actions were in 2006. And the city's been pretty strong in its lack of interest of modifying Tabor in any way. I just want to, they can vote to do differently, but I don't want to hinge the refund on that voter sentiment. I'd like to have two separate ballot issues.
Well, I'm suggesting that we have the I'm suggesting, I think we're in violent agreement that we have the refund as a valid issue, and we have the base adjustment as another valid issue.
That's the way I feel.
But not detailing.
I do have
No,
a
not
question
detailing.
about.
Exactly, that's why I want to have both of those two separate as well.
This is,
I do have a question about the chronology you have. There was another one after 2007 that went to the voters.
There was,
Passed, and it was a Tabor.
2007 was the last one.
Okay, that's not on here.
Yeah, that's the last.
And it passed.
It did. That's the one where we listed the 5 specific
Exactly.
projects. Yes.
Okay.
So that's in your
I
zone.
thought that
Fire station was one part of it.
Yes.
Training facility.
Yeah.
What I'm thinking of, so we,
The election was in 08.
given at least that Director Hooten's projections are not a lot of cushion for the following year, I'm thinking if we retain the excess for 2016 and 2017 and have that as one ballot measure, not adjusting the base, and then adjusting the base as another ballot measure, and we have a list of projects that we would have, that means if retention passes, we don't have to have an election next year, and we don't have to go through that cost.
If you did retention from 1 year and the base passed, you wouldn't need probably an election for 2017. It's all an if.
but the thing is.
But there's a risk of losing 2016 by adding another year on.
Yeah, it increases the risk.
You take a bite.
Is there any track record of having these two types of questions? Do we know other cities who have gone about this? Every city is unique, but do we have any track record of increasing the base along with keeping the excess from a specific year?
Littleton has a good track record because we did it once already.
We did it.
We did.
That-
And I believe City and County of Denver also did that
Right.
recently.
So what year was that? Was it 08 that we increased the base?
Yes.
Because the language is virtually the same.
Yes.
So
You're right on either side of it, we returned $1 million and 1.1 million.
right, but we were trying to de-taper
Yeah.
instead of just increasing the base, significantly different issue. So, boy, I'm almost tempted to package it, go for it, but I think it makes more sense to reduce risk because keeping the money with the specific issues enumerated, I think we have a pretty good shot. I say good shot because those are all, I mean, not to vote for that says that you don't favor accessibility and you don't care about dangerous intersections. So, I'd go along with Phil's if we could be specific enough in issues where we'd spend it in the second year because it would make sense not to have to go back to the ballot box, and it would enable Mark to plan a little bit better because we know we need that infrastructure money. We know the budget's extraordinarily tight this year, and our citizens have been very supportive of infrastructure improvements in the past.
I think there's a risk. I think the risk is greater than $25,000.
Totally.
So
It's got to be separate.
I would feel more comfortable splitting, if we've got to deal with it in 2017 and it's going to cost us $25,000, and I'd feel more comfortable doing that. I think that we have a really important job in being able to message this because at the same time we're messaging, we will be going through budget. And all of that's going to hit before, we can do all that before we hit that magic date that says we can't campaign. So, and everybody's going to be thinking present time. I'd feel more comfortable 2016 split the issues, do 1 year, and then do that ask on the second.
No, like I have the majority of council at this point already saying it's option
Yep.
2. It's just a single year, no, not trying to make it multi-year, and not presenting the other one, or the one.
And then just present.
I'm not sure on that.
No, what I was hearing was 2 ballot.
Two ballots.
ballots, yeah.
Two.
If the second ballot measure is the base.
Yeah.
Yes.
Base adjustment.
Okay, there you go. And so the second ballot measure.
Yep.
Yeah.
Can we talk about the specificity in the list of projects?
Yes.
Please.
Yes, please.
I mean, what I'd like to see is that maybe the highest priority that would, if we were in the position of polling, would like to see the highest priority item be the first one on the list that folks would see, given that sometimes folks don't need to read the whole list, but if they see one that they can identify with, that'll be enough. And I'm not sure which of these is the highest priority. I would tell you that one that benefits my neighborhood street, if I was John Q. Public on this, would be the one that I would look at and say, hey, that one's going to benefit my street. And I could say, hey, I don't need to read any further, and that's a yes.
Councilmember Sarniak, if I can just add to that, if you remember the most recent business and citizen survey, street maintenance was one of the top 3 concerns of citizens. So I think you can relate that to that survey.
I agree with Phil. I would do pavement improvement.
Totally.
First, and I would do Bowles Avenue and Federal intersection second.
And that's where I would leave it. That's those 2 right there.
So switch 1 and 4.
Well, I don't think you get to the 1-9 if you just have those, unless you just do.
Put it all into street maintenance.
Yeah, and it's needed. I go for that. Yeah.
One item, street maintenance. One item, street maintenance is what I'm saying?
No, 2 items.
And street maintenance,
I'd be okay with one. I'd be okay with one.
improvements. I mean, I think,
You have
One
to,
at a time, I can't hear.
Yeah.
Sorry.
we know that.
One,
I can punch.
there are 2 items. Number 1 is street maintenance, and number 2 would be pole safety.
And, okay, so we do have the word safety in there. I think the word safety is really a key issue.
That is definitely the intent of that project, the safety improvements. That is an intersection we struggle with deeply, to be honest.
We get letters on it.
And I think leave just those 2 items right there.
Good idea.
yeah. Instead of just maintenance, is it just going to be maintenance we would use it for, or would it be maintenance, improvements, repairs? Is that all maintenance, or?
Well, maintenance and repair, I suppose, would be a broader term. I'm looking at the...
Improvements would be, I would consider improvements to be a different bucket. Like, we were having this discussion today in the office, and pull up the next slide for a second. So, in 2014, after a 30-year hiatus, the city performed a pavement condition index. And to put this in perspective, to understand where you are on a pavement condition index, we have streets here in the city that have a PCI. The PCI scale goes from 0 to 100. We have streets in the city that are below 30. To put that in comparison to your home, that would be like your home not having front stairs, and not just your roof leaking, but buckets leaking through your roof.
Is this golf or football? Is it low score or high score?
You want to have the high, you want to have 100. You want to go 0 to 100. And so, to realistically, I'm just going to be honest, it's very rare to see communities with a PCI at this level. I only know of one other major metro city that has that challenge right now, here in the Front Range. And so what we did was we took the PCI index and with our consultants, and this is kind of just a dartboard of the top on that list to receive maintenance treatment. So when we talk about maintenance, we're talking about paving, we're talking about chip seals, we're talking about slurry seals. Obviously, you have to do some curb and gutter work occasionally to address drainage in the maintenance side. But this kind of gives you, this is just the top hitter list right here. Because once you start to get into those ones that are below, say, that 30 or 40 index, you got to rebuild them. Because going out there and milling it out and putting new asphalt in, you're going to be in the same place in 3 years. And, you know, it's like painting over it before you scrape it on your house. You know, you got to scrape it. So this is just a potential list of candidates to give you an idea sort of what that spread looks like around the city conceptually. Not that all of these will be touched, but this is a place to start as we look through strategically how we're going to lay, even if it's just $1 million for next year, and if you add the additional Tabor funds on top of it, how that would triage its way through your needs.
I'm sort of thinking strategy. The way you expressed what you did with the analogy to a house needs to be part of what gets communicated. Because people understand when the roof is leaking because you have this or don't or whatever. I mean, that is very, very helpful, I think.
I think what you do is somewhere along the line we have a picture of a PCI index 30 street. I mean, if we go back to what LPS did with their bond issue, I mean, they actually had little flags and buildings and took pictures of those. And that was part of their explanation of if we prioritize it based on PCI index, this is what gets addressed, and we go as efficiently as we can through the money.
Sorry, you were next. How come District 1 is not even in the photograph?
That's
The representative.
Yeah.
You see,
Heads up, the indicated District 1.
I mean, we've got some bad roads too, and I'm just, is that just a sample?
This is just a sample. This is not intended to be a holistic list of all the projects.
Just a sample. I mean, it's the issue we have of roadway deterioration and infrastructure deterioration is widespread. There's really no section of the community that's not under that umbrella right now.
This is tangential, but I use click and fix because there were 3 major potholes in one little intersection. They came out and they fixed the one that was, there were 3 kind of spread out, so I just took a picture of one of them. And they fixed that one, but the other 2 that were 10 feet away, they didn't fix. Is that?
We're working on some of those things.
Is that intentional or is that?
Well, we knew it came from you, so that was why we got it.
All I knew. I'm not going to ask any more questions.
So I mean, realistically, yeah. I mean, that's one of the challenges we have is that you know, if you look at that gap out there where we have it, sometimes you go out there and there's so much out there that it's hard to deal with. And then in a case like that, if you're there, let's do it. And that's part of the process of consistent improvement to excellence to drive forward. And so some of those things you talk about, like showing, you know, what is a PCI of 30 versus 50 or 70, that's part of the process we'll be going through in updating the website just in general so that our citizens have a better idea of where their infrastructure is, what that difference is, and how we go forward.
It just didn't seem cost effective.
Right, I'm absolutely at 100% in agreement with you on that.
Sure. So I know, Mark, you've given us a couple of presentations on our streets and compared them to Lone Tree and others, and I'm sure you guys have read all that good stuff, you and Brett and Keith. If you could take those 2-hour presentation into a 5-minute thing, easy said than done. But because that you really did put it, because you put it in the numbers that Keith was talking about versus a Lone Tree versus a Lakewood versus Highlands Ranch, and it really put us where we are.
Yeah, I think we have all sorts of data where it'll make us much more effective at communicating this issue to our citizens. So yeah, some of the past work that we've done, some of the work that engineering has done, quite honestly just lately, I think we have actually a lot of information and a good story to tell, or maybe a bad story to tell, I guess.
You depressed us every time you gave it.
Yeah, well, you know, and I think maybe the one part I just want to make sure is clear, and Keith touched on this, when we have a PCI of 30, we're not really doing anything with it when we talk about maintenance. That's a completely different problem. What we're really trying to do is preservation. So we're focusing on a little higher in the index so that it doesn't reach the 30. So I think that's the problem historically we've had. We've been doing a lot of overlays and spending that kind of cost on some of these lower level streets and letting these other higher qualities slowly degrade to the point where it's becoming almost unmanageable at this point. So this kind of investment for Leslie puts us way ahead of trying to do just overlay.
Go ahead, Jim.
One last question then, Keith. So then, are we predominantly doing this ourselves as city staff, or do we put it out to a bid to see if we can get something better? What do we do?
It's a combination. But that's one of the things that as a team, just to give you all a sense of where we're at, Brent's entire division is turning over in 14 months, start to finish, everyone, due to retirement. So we have some challenges there. We have great new talent coming in, but we're also losing decades of knowledge about the community at the same time. And so we're trying to overcome some of those things. And so, we have a combination. We're sitting down now looking at what we're going to do in 2018's paving season, how we're going to strategically do it. We have some different opportunities technologically to bring some other things to bear to I think, do a different job than we're doing today.
We do like incentives and stuff like that on if we have a contract. We do performance incentives.
Yeah, I'm a big supporter of things. In a paving, if we have a paving job, we're looking at smoothest standards, and those kind of things. Yeah, exactly. I'm getting closer to smoothness standards. So, those kind of things. And, if we're doing a big construction project, acceleration clauses and incentives are all those kind of things that are tools to help you do better with the community issue.
Because I think that would be another thing to share with our citizens is that we're going to do it the most cost-effective way, but not the cheapest way.
Exactly. Cost-effective. That's what we're after.
Yeah.
Well said.
So I don't want to say that the city's going to do all of this when we can find contractors that can do some of it.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've had a lot of conversation internal to the department here about how we approach our resources. So our existing staff, what is it that they focus on? What can they do effectively versus contracting? So, a lot of this work we're talking about, quite honestly, is going to be contracted.
Okay.
Which is great. It's an economic development tool at the same time.
Yeah.
Just we wanted to close with one last slide here before we jump off here, just that Brent put together that shows the impacts of the different treatment methodologies that you can use, just as a broad brush approach.
Yeah, so it's a good segue to what Mark was talking about and what Mark has talked to you about over the last couple of years, that there's a variety of pavement preservation techniques that we can undertake, from crack sealing, surface sealing, mill and overlay, and full reconstruction. So this just shows how far your dollars can go with our historical 1.1 allocation of street improvements, the potential 1.9 in Tabor. We've identified our short-term needs in the range of $5.8 million. So funds that are allocated today certainly won't tackle the full needs.
Can I ask about the crack sealing? Because the others I wrap my head around. But some streets you have a crack that kind of goes along. But some other streets you got cracks all over the place as you go along. So what are we talking about per mile for that?
There becomes a point where too many cracks is not efficient to even crack seal. It's not worth putting the crack sealant on. You're better doing a surface seal to seal up some of those smaller cracks, or perhaps go to a mill and overlay. We don't want to waste our money sealing every square foot.
It's kind of like linear foot of crack when you actually are just doing the crack sealing.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's one of the first techniques that you want to undertake on a brand new street, is to seal the cracks right away.
Okay.
If you think about it this way, let's say you go out there and you build a brand new street. If you just don't touch it and do anything to it, probably in Colorado in about 20 years with moderate traffic levels, you're going to have to go rebuild the street. You'll go off the end of that curve and have to reconstruct it. But if you go out there and you do regular frequent maintenance techniques, crack sealing and then a slurry seal at some point, maybe you might have to do an overlay of asphalt, but at some point maybe not. you can extend the life of that street 40, 50, 60 years, but that's dependent upon good maintenance techniques along the way and not letting you get to the cliff edge. Because once you go off the cliff edge, you go from spending like $1.50 to $8. It's an exponential change. It's not a linear change. And so that's why preservation is so critical to your infrastructure over time.
So how often are you trying to get cracks sealed? I mean, like if there's a street right now that has crack in it, when might that get done?
Well, usually we get out there and we look at it, and you do a lot of crack sealing in the winter, because this time of year, when it's 95 out, you don't want to be crack sealing, because it ends up in everybody's driveway. But, you're really out there looking for places where sometimes it's just a real small surface crack, and other times it's the deep ones. You want to get on that. If you think about what you're trying to do is keep Mother Nature's, sort of biggest weapon, which is water, out of that thing. And that's really what your goal is. And so if you think of it as a technique to do that, you're looking at your broad cracks, your longitudinal cracks, and how do you do those types of things.
So, Keith, Tiffany, Brent, the 1.1 million that we have, and then we're talking about retention of roughly 1.9 or close to 2, so it ends up being 3 million plus. The 1.1 million is our share of HCTF funds, so that we have to spend on the streets. So that's what we have to spend on the streets, and the retention would say, hey, we're going to augment that. You're showing identified short-term needs of 5.8, so 3 million doesn't even get us to the total for that at this point in time. I'd like to see, at least in some of the explanations, what's the total mileage of streets that are city responsibilities, so that we have an idea of where that is. And you might take that identified short-term needs and say, okay, what does 3 million get us? And what does that do with the overall rating for the city? And that result.
Well, to go to what you're saying, Phil, is one of the things that's important to us as we move forward is we really, I think, need to do a better job of telling the story of our infrastructure, whether it's the stuff in the ground with sewer or stormwater versus the infrastructure like the roadways, and helping people understand that even if we're spending the $1 million a year in gas tax money, in order to keep your infrastructure at a certain level that people expect, you're going to have to invest some other dollars in that, whether it's general fund, whether it's other revenue techniques, which I've been involved in other communities, for example, pavement preservation. So those are the way, it's telling that story so we understand that there's a funding gap, and the funding gap only gets wider over time.
Yeah, I'm just trying to say, with regard to the ballot language, is to say we're not hitting our total short-term need, even with the retention that's there here. We're making a bigger dent than what the HUTF funds that have historically been there. And where part of the story is where we've historically had a transfer into the capital fund, the fact that we're not seeing that is why this is a smart thing to do.
Agreed. Yeah, I think we have as part of our communication strategy on this, we're going to have to think through how we communicate our problem. It's more than a simple 1.9 added onto the budget. It's a bigger view of our capital challenge here over time.
So another technical question. So go back to the crack sealing, just as an example. It's so much per mile or whatever, but I live in a corner. The street in front of the house is narrower than the street on the side of the house. And then both of those are narrower than the 4-lane streets or whatever. So what are we talking about when we talk per mile?
That's the numbers that are up there, really an average that would, basically encompass a typical 2-lane section. The 2-lane section. And so, some of those narrower sections will do some balancing out of some of the arterials, and you tend to have the wider lanes on those arterials. So you balance, this is an average to illustrate, what the potential is, but it's really based on a 2-lane section, which is the vast majority of what's in our community.
So, and I think if we're publicizing that to the people, we need them to know that, right? So here is the most streets in Littleton. But then we also have others, so that's more expensive.
Okay, we have one other item. I think we've identified the ballot, what it's going to look like. We have some wording requests to Luca and Mark. So hopefully that will be very close to that when it comes to us at the regular session. But we didn't talk about, should we have to refund? Is there a preferential manner we'd like to do? And you would like to carry that. You'd like to know that tonight.
Preferably.
Okay.
So the one thing that Tabor does not prescribe is how a city is to refund at Tabor Excess. So we kind of have a lot of options. In theory, however, practically, I've listed 3, I believe, that I think it warrants discussion for council. So the first one is a temporary reduction in property taxes. And I'm going to say, please promise not to believe these numbers currently, because these are estimates. We don't get final property tax numbers until November, so these are approximations as to the actual amount of the potential refund if you do a reduction. There's some timing that we'll have to ensure if we were to go this route, but it equates to about a 31 or 35% reduction in your property tax revenues, or property tax for your homes. I kind of put 16 per 100,000 or 667 per $1 million for commercial properties. And again, these are just approximate numbers because we don't get final numbers until November.
Say that again, the 35%.
It's approximately about a 30 or 35% reduction of the mill levy percentage. So our mill levy is 6.662. It's going to be about 2.03.
So it's a 35% reduction in the city's portion of versus property tax.
Right. And just for reference, the city's portion, I believe it's, I don't know the exact number, but it's...
We're in the 50s, I think, or something like that, or the 60s.
Right.
Total.
And that's all through county, right?
Through the county, yes. This has been done in other jurisdictions, so we're comfortable with this method. It is little to no cost. You simply submit your mill levy to the county at the reduced rate for 1 year temporarily. Another refund option is to actually issue refunds to voters or property owners. This was what was done in 2000 with the 2007 excess. We did refund $20 per registered voter and $41.49 per property owner. I will caution that this is kind of like the gift that keeps on giving, if you will. We issued refunds in 2008 of about 39,000 checks individually that went out in envelopes of 26,000. It was a lot of work. We did it in-house. I'm not proposing that we do that in-house ever again. So the costs related to that are about $48,000 to outsource that. Some issues we have with that is we have to get voter registration from the counties. We also have to get lists of property owners from the counties. We have to vet through the information to determine who qualifies, who doesn't qualify. There's some issues with trusts. There's some issues with multiple landowners, things like that. So it is very time intensive. Like I said, we issued this in 2008, and I will tell you that we still have phone calls from citizens who have found a check and are asking if they can cash it today. That has happened in the past 6 months. So as I say, the gift that keeps on giving, we do have to deal with this continuously.
So is that $61 for a property owner who's also registered?
Yes, that's correct. So a homeowner, husband and wife, got $81.49 essentially if they're both registered voters.
Or did you register?
It did take a considerable amount of staff time and continued after the fact. But we did do that.
Do you know how many checks did not get cashed?
I do. It was 4,000.
It's a good way to keep some of the
10%. That's not the way we want to go on that one, I'd say.
You're not supporting that one, are you?
I don't hear it.
It's unfortunate because it's the most fair in terms of the amount of refund. Because and I agree with what you're saying, Tiffany, but the registered voters and the property owners, it puts a premium on, those who have more get more back. And building use and impact fees, there are a lot of out-of-town investors that are going to get refunds of Littleton sales taxes. They may never spend a penny here.
I will say it is an option and it has been done in the past.
Yeah, those two both have some warts on them that I don't care for, but the administrative nightmare of the other one makes you kind of go one of the other directions.
Are those it?
There is one other.
Can we do direct deposit?
No.
I have an email address that will get everybody's.
The third option that I've listed is the rebate of a building permit, a building use tax, or an impact fee. We can get the data from our city records. This would go to a relatively select group. The refunds will vary depending on the methodology, and there are minimal costs with this. I included in your information, I did a quick report, and if you do it on a pro rata basis, the refunds vary from $1 to $300,000 depending on how much the developer paid in or the homeowner. It is an option. I'm not aware of any other jurisdictions that have done this in particular, but it is, again, an option.
Have you thought about it as a sales tax holiday?
So I considered it for about 2 seconds, and I'll tell you why. That has been vetted previously when we were facing a refund of 1.1 in 2007. We did discuss that. The problem that we have in Littleton is there is no easy way for businesses to recalculate, adjust their financial systems, their POS systems to accommodate for that. So there would be a lot of communication that's needed with businesses. I think the bigger issue is that a lot of people have a Littleton mailing address, and so they presume that they're in the city limits of Littleton, so regulating that would definitely be an issue. Southwest Plaza has a Littleton address. They are not in Littleton proper. I would be concerned if they were adjusting their sales tax rate for a certain particular amount of time based on a Littleton Tabor refund, and they're not even in Littleton. So I do not recommend that. We looked at that previously, and just the way that our postal service is, it's just not feasible for us to do that.
One for the first option. Yep. You want to go around the room and see?
I'm for the first.
Yes, it's the least evil. That's number one.
So got a consensus for the first option.
So, and with my final slide, our staff recommendation is to ask voters to retain the money for specific capital projects and then provide direction for an alternative refund.
Got it.
You got it.
Good work.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're ready to move on to...
Footnote I'd add on the alternative refund method, just so we formalize it a bit, is just to have a resolution, simple resolution.
That's what I think we need. A resolution. Simple resolution. Okay.
Steve already was on it.
It's going to be a very simple resolution.
Yeah.
Okay. Got to make a little technology change here as we get that topic off the board. We're going to move to agenda item C, ID 17-223, fire dispatch and the request for mediation. And I'm going to turn it over to the city manager.
So, Council, if I may, in your staff communication there, you have you received 2 letters here from our fire partners, one from the Highlands Ranch Metro District and the other from the Littleton Fire Protection District. They have made a formal request per our agreement here for us to enter into mediation based on the decision council made here for dispatching with, or actually not contracting with South Metro for dispatching services. So I think I'd like to frame up this issue here from a staff perspective. I think the first question for council is whether or not you want to agree to mediation. And guess I should also mention the fact that you've received a confidential memo from the city attorney here on kind of the legal issues surrounding the mediation request. So again, the first issue from staff's perspective is yes or no on the mediation. If you do agree to mediation, then staff is requesting that there be some council discussion about the issues that you believe in the contract with South Metro for fire dispatch that you believe are worth raising in mediation, issues that you have questions about or suggestions about how to approach that perhaps differently. Because the staff will need that kind of conversation and consensus to carry into mediation, assuming that's where you want to go. So that would be my suggestion here to council tonight on this issue.
So do we want to go around the room and see whether there's agreement to move forward with mediation?
Bruce, I think there's a step before that because at the end of the vote on it last week, there were a couple people who just had a couple of issues. They said there were a couple of questions they had about things. And if we agree on those issues, it seems like we may not be that far from an understanding or an agreement to introduce this as a new issue or a revisit or whatever terminology you want to have. We've had very good evidence come across that this would be a considerable cost savings to the city, that it's safer, there's better training, it's more flexible. We'd have a certified dispatch center. The long-term outlook is better for safety, and an example of that is that with South Metro's dispatch center having more dispatchers on duty at a given time, if there's a major event in the Southbridge Apartments, is Southbridge? Southview apartment fire, they would have had a dispatcher go to that scene and be on site, according to information that I've heard, said that it saves a whole step in the process, and then your dispatchers back at the main center are free to handle any other incidents in the city. That's a huge safety advantage. So if you've got a safer system, certified dispatch that costs less, it seems to me that if there were specific issues that a couple of council members had, that we ought to hear those issues and get those issues out. And I don't think we need to go to mediation if we're that close to an understanding on this, because that is the most efficient way to get this solved. It's I think, best for the city in the long run. And it keeps us from going through a very expensive mediation process that has no guaranteed outcome. There's significant financial risk to it. And I also question if this falls apart and we have different fire dispatch systems around that, you've got a fragmented system, and that's never good. You want to have a seamless system that has as high a level of cooperation and understanding among those districts as possible. So I'd like to hear, and I think it was Bruce and Jerry that said they had specific issues or questions that had not been resolved. Now, we had been through 3 study sessions, and we had been through a first reading, and in each one of those, it was a 6-1 indication by this council that they favored going forward with this. And then we got into the second reading for final approval, and all of a sudden it flipped to 4-3. How that happened, I don't know. But if there are specific issues that arose, and I would suggest that maybe the term is one of them, and some of the presentation issues that we may have had, let's fix those. Let's try to do that first before we jump into mediation, which is time-consuming, costly, and fractious.
So I hear everything you're saying, but we took a vote.
But this is not,
We cannot retake the vote at this session.
I'm not saying that we would take a Bruce.
We can come forward again, but I think what you do is you put the people who voted contrary to your point of view You're asking for them to restate again to justify their vote. And
I'm not.
we can't do that.
I'm not.
That violates our protocols.
You didn't hear me, Bruce.
Yes, I did.
Let me restate it.
Very clearly.
Well, let me restate it.
So let me say again,
Bruce,
we're not
misrepresenting me,
going to look for head nods or agreements or whatever to discuss 6, 1, 3, 4, or whatever. It's inappropriate. Now, if you want to talk about the letters that we received, and we want to talk about the issues in those, that's appropriate. Otherwise, I don't think it is. And
you're totally misrepresenting what I said. I'm saying bring forth is a new issue. And that is not to bring something back for reconsideration. The time is gone for that. And I think the city attorney can clarify that, whether or not it can be brought forth as a new issue, with specific questions answered. I'm asking for clarification on
Bill,
that.
I'll tell you, I gave my reasons that evening, and they haven't been resolved. And I can be very specific about them if you'd like to, but I don't think it's appropriate to go through it again. However, the argument that was given, as is stated in one of the letters, was very clear. The fire chief says he has difficulty filling the positions. He cannot keep staff on board. One of the letters states that specifically as the reason why they feel we are out of line as a council because we did fail to understand that. The fact is, and this is where I just hate that we're bringing this up again, this council approved 1.5 positions to be implemented this year. Was not done. This council signed a contract with Cunningham that had certain measurements of performance. Cunningham comes in and says, was not done. We have the documentation presented to us that says that the staffing was inadequate, can't maintain the mission in the fire department, and we find out there was a hiring freeze for 6 months. I'm not going to be pushed into a decision that overthrows 50 years of how we've done business based on presumptions that we find are false. And so I cannot, in good faith, make that kind of decision until we get to the real numbers. And I've asked that all along. The real numbers would be very helpful. In the second letter, it says that the leaving of Cunningham is worth $300,000 savings and a $200,000 savings to the writer of that letter. I have no idea where those numbers came from. I can't support them with anything that I've seen. And until I see the numbers, I'm not interested in pursuing it further because it was presented improperly and I feel not fulfilling the obligation that we have of the staff to present us correct information.
You just stated exactly what I'm looking for.
That's what I'm looking for. But I hate that I have to say that all over again because I said it that evening.
Well,
if I may chime in too, have my share. I'm willing to move on with what our direction is tonight to go forward with this on whether or not we're going to have mediation. And I support what you also just said as to why I was opposed.
Why you what? Your last sentence.
Why I was opposed when we voted. But I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about what we came to talk about. And I believe you sent us an email that suggested that's what we should stick to.
I'm going to suggest, again, that what I'm hearing is there are administrative objections to what is a long-term solution. I encourage the council to look long-term, and if there are short-term issues that we have, that it's our due diligence, we owe it to ourselves, and we owe it to the citizens of Littleton to deliver the safest, most financially expeditious system that we can. And these are, if we have hiring issues, if we have administrative issues that are represented in numerical presentations or terms of agreement or whatever, that's something that should be worked out. We shouldn't throw out what is a very strong opportunity because of the lack of some information in some specific areas. And I'd be interested to hear what other members on council feel about that.
I don't think that going to mediation is going to help us. I think it's going to prolong the whole issue. So I'm not in favor of going around the table on that?
Yeah, we can go around.
Is that what
That's
we're
open
doing?
for discussion.
Well, I'm in favor of going to mediation.
I'm in favor of going to mediation only because it seems like some facts might be presented that might help us all reach what are appropriate decisions for the citizens of Littleton. And because that is an environment in which I think perhaps a little more due diligence can be done to finding out what the facts are. And then I also think that communication is really important. We've had these partners for 40 years, and I can point to two presumptions in those letters that I think are incorrect, that they're moving forward on. I think it's very important to have that discussion with them.
Well, let me rephrase it. I think it's important to have a discussion with the partners. I think we probably ought to sit down and have a discussion about the entire fire system and what makes sense going forward. I think we're going to have some financial challenges and some differences in expectation on expenditures in the three districts. I think we need to sit down and talk with the partners, and I think we need to do it in a rational and calm manner. But to sit down and start a discussion specifically about mediation communication on the dispatch center, I don't think is going to lead us to success. I think that's going to prolong the dispatch issue. And you're right, there is some either misperceptions or statements of incorrect facts that are being thrown about. We could say that that's, regardless of what the motivation is, it would be nice to clear that up. But I don't think starting a formal process of mediation related to the contract is going to get us to a very successful conclusion. So I am in favor, by all means, of sitting down with the partners and talking. I think we need to have a discussion about what the future is of the partnership, what the expectations are of service delivery, how that's going to be paid for, all sorts of things. But to go down the narrow path of the dispatch center on mediation as a specific trigger in the contract, I think is going to probably derail the process.
Doug, let me ask, you said you didn't think it would lead to success. How do you define success? What are you looking for there?
Well, right now what we have is a letter that says you either go through mediation or we're going to consider leaving the partnership. They could leave the partnership at any time. I don't want to go down the path of having a long, drawn-out, and as you say, expensive mediation session on dispatch and then have them say in November, see ya, going away. I've been through that before. It is costly, it's difficult to recover from, and it was specifically on the dispatch center. If they're willing to break apart the partnership and the fire department because we're not willing to dismember the fire department or a portion of it, then I think that mediation isn't going to help that. Frankly, I don't want to get into an argument about the cost figures, but they're either carelessly or deliberately throwing out false cost figures. They're adding the loss of revenue for Cunningham to the additional cost of the difference to come up with a ridiculous $500,000 a year figure. So mediation is for a specific reason if we're triggering this off the contract. We probably ought to have a discussion with them, but we have a lot of issues related to fire, and part of those issues are caused by the fact that we really are in a contractual relationship and we espouse this as being a partnership, but it really isn't. And how that makes it difficult for us to manage this. I mean, there's a lot of issues related to this. So we could go through the mediation. I don't know that the mediation is going to change our viewpoint, those that voted against doing dispatch. So if we're going through mediation, we could do that as just a way of trying to delay some kind of decision, but there are real issues with the partnership, and there are real issues with fire delivery, and there's real issues with management. And I don't think that going down the path of singling out dispatch is going to get us there. That's my feeling.
Do we know who the representatives are in a mediation? Who represents the city, who represents the districts? Who's involved in that? I mean, that might help council decide if they want to go into mediation.
In terms of the city, what I would anticipate it would be myself, and then whoever the city manager would designate, and I'm thinking that probably would be Mr. Young.
Deputy city manager.
The deputy city manager to speak on behalf of the city. That's normally what you would see on the other parties as well. It's that it would either be the fire chief or deputy fire chief, or in the case of the Metro District, the district general manager or the deputy general manager, along with their lawyers. And it would normally be done at probably the mediator's office. And the parties sometimes are brought together, sometimes they are in separate rooms, and the mediator just sort of shuttles back and forth between the rooms.
And a follow-up question to that, does the agreement state that the mediator has to be certified by the American Arbitration Association?
The agreement just calls for the parties to suggest a mediator, and I have to go back and look at it doesn't have an AA certification, but it does have some reference to mediation experience. There's a number of people out there who do this, both retired lawyers and retired judges. I've done many mediations, and if you get the right, sometimes you never get to an agreement, and sometimes you do. I've had mediators who, quite honestly, have been very, very effective. You've had parties that they simply weren't able to interact themselves, and the mediator helped bring them together. I've also had mediations where the mediator's view was, you should just give in, and that usually doesn't work. And so, but that would be the basic process.
From my perspective, I believe we should have a mediation discussion. I have some confidence that our partners of 40 years can approach it as adults as well, and that additional data, if it's available, can surface so that an intelligent dialogue can actually occur. It may not be restricted to the specifics as mentioned in the letters, because mediation can go to additional items and can actually be adult conversations of all the issues that may be involved. I think looking at the future, cost and safety are important issues that I would put out there, whether we're dealing with dispatch or otherwise, and that as we take a look at the issues going forward, we have some issues that may end up talking about control and accountability that can occur across the partnership. And I think that would be some fair game for discussion. I don't imagine that the conversation has to be short, but that I believe it would be fruitful to have that and would not throw away 40 years of a partnership by rejecting a call for mediation and dialogue.
I remind you that the letter says that they want a resolution by November, or they're going to make a decision.
And they have that right to do.
We certainly do, regardless of what we decide one way or the other.
So I think I'm confused in the intent of mediation. So is it in order to have a contract, or is it in order to separate, part ways, or is it in order to identify all the issues to be resolved in deciding to do one or the other, or is it something else entirely?
Councilmember Cole, members of the council, I think the intent here would be on the mediation would be to see if we could obtain the factual issues to then come back with a resolution of these concerns that we could discuss with the council. I think that right now we have these two letters, each one saying, we think we have a dispute with you and we want to go to mediation. The letters make some reference in one letter to the Southcom dispatch, and the other letter, it just kind of says, well, yes, we kind of agree with that letter. And so I think the intent of mediation in most cases, and I think this would be typical, would be to see if we can find A, determine what the exact facts are in terms of the dispute, and B, then determine if there's a resolution that all the parties can discuss with the mediator. Now, keep in mind, there's no binding discussion. Mediators know, particularly when you mediate with governments, that the decision makers are right here. So we as your representatives, we talk and we will discuss with the mediator, but the mediator will know that the decision makers are here and what we can't make any binding commitments.
Okay, that's what I was thinking, but I needed to put that out. So that being the case, I think we should have mediation.
I definitely support mediation. I think, I hate to see that it's gotten to this point. I hate to see that we've gotten these letters, these partners, and they are partners. We have been working together with them for 40 years. We've had rough times, we've had better times. And this is, it's unfortunate that it's gotten to this point, but I do appreciate the fact that they are asking for mediation. And I understand that it's not binding, but I think that there's an opportunity for there to be a dialogue about what some of the concerns are, and I hope that when it comes back to the council that we're ready to look at it as a separate entity. One of the things that continues to keep happening, it's been said tonight repeatedly, about that it's the inferences back to the unification. This would have come whether there was a unification or not. This has frankly been in the wings for years. A solution to the problem there. Solution to the problem there is not 1.5 employees either. God bless us for trying. But, you know, I have a great regret. I've sat on this council for 10 years and known there's a problem there, listened to the problem, listened to the issues, did the tour of the place. When we finally have a chief that comes in and just calls it out and says there is a problem there and I have an idea for a solution and this is what that is and now we're sitting here dealing with this. So I think if a mediation will get us back into a focus on what we're really here to discuss, what we're really here to make a decision about, then I'm all for it. And I think that absolutely we owe it to our partners to sit down at the table and have this discussion. So absolutely for mediation, I have nothing to add. I thought the IGA, the contract was absolutely fine, and I'm good with it the way it is.
I favor mediation because it indicates a desire on the part of both parties to come to the table. If you don't favor mediation, you don't want a solution. So I think it's the right way to go.
Yeah, I'm in favor of mediation too. I really think we can maybe come to I think the three of us can come to an agreement on, and that we're all willing to go with, whether we all go our separate ways or together. I think it's something that we need to do at this point.
So the next issue is specific items that need to be addressed, and you've heard some of those as well.
Yeah, I don't know if there's anything new to add to that, but if there is consensus around some issues, key issues there, it'd be nice to maybe discuss that, identify that. I heard a few.
The term was mentioned, I think. I heard that before. What else? You know, there have been
cost of the savings.
Right.
Just trying to reassess that, confirm that.
I think, you know, there have been some comments made about numbers. I think Tiffany is very capable with him. I think we've been a little bit unfair to the chief to put him in a position of having to drill down into a lot of detail on the numbers. He's a firefighter tried to do his best with it, and I think a combination of people to bring all that together, if we can do that and take a fresh look at it prior to the mediation, that really, maybe that answers some of the stuff that, some of the concerns, some of the clarifications.
Actually, and I think we will be doing some of that, because usually in a mediation, before the mediation starts, the parties have to submit to the mediator a position statement. So I do think the fire chief is going to be drilling down into some numbers quite a bit, because we'll have a position statement to draft. And so I am certain he and I will be talking about numbers.
I'm good with that. Unless there's anything
As well as options.
Yes.
I wanted to hear options.
Would it be possible to get a memo as to what specifically you guys took from here as to the issues and send it out to council? And if somebody's come up with something else, it can be added. Would that be just a good closing of this?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. My caution is that if we have a single council member who wants to add something to that without more dialogue, that can be a little problematic.
Okay.
But
Yeah, I
we
agree.
certainly can kind of summarize the discussion we've heard.
Just a
here.
summary without any.
So who comes up with the position statement?
I
That represents the city
expect
position.
it's going to be probably the city manager, the deputy city manager, the fire chief, and myself. Probably going to be the 4-point people, because in fashioning that, the written position statement that we submit.
Teamwork.
But it is something council blesses though.
Oh, the position statement is really a confidential. There'll be an update memo that's just requested. The actual position statement, generally what the rules of mediation is those go to the mediators. The other parties don't see yours, and we don't see theirs. And the only person who sees all three will be the mediator. And basically, it's sort of, I would describe it as sort of the opening offer, so to speak. It's what each party views as their initial position. And what the mediator would then do is he or she would talk to each of the parties and see, okay, are there some things in common here on the mediation statements that we can sort of get off the table? And because a lot of times when parties come into mediations, it's sort of fairly adverse. But when you actually get a little bit beyond the emotion and a little bit beyond the fact that usually they've been at odds for some time, you begin to find, okay, well, no, everyone agrees with this, so let's get this off the table. And you begin to get down to where you may only have 3 issues, and those are the 3 issues really in dispute, and then the mediator will focus on those 3 issues to see, can we get to a resolution or not? And sometimes you can, on mediated major auto accident cases where there's been fatalities, and the real issue was that the parents in that case felt that there needed to be more safety measures taken along the road. The money issue really wasn't the issue. Everybody's focused on the money. Money wasn't the issue. The issue was safety measures. And that's where a mediator can sort of work through and get to what sometimes the real issues are, versus when people sort of start out, they're focused on what they think the issues are, which may not be the issues at all.
Nice ending. That's the mediator, right? The mediator.
Any other questions? We're adjourned?
Yeah.
Okay.